Lupus is what's called an autoimmune disease. It's a condition where the immune system, rather than just protecting the body against viruses and bacteria, it also mistakenly recognizes the body's own healthy cells as foreign invaders. So it creates this abundance of antibodies that cause inflammation and damage throughout the body, affecting all the various tissues. So it can create a bewildering array of different symptoms that can range from extreme fatigue, joint pains, muscle aches and weakness, hair loss, rashes, and it can also affect any of the organs, including the kidneys, the heart, the lungs, and the brain. No two people with lupus tend to be affected in exactly the same way, and it is a very serious disease. So lupus is treated with a variety of different medications. A lot of these are borrowed from other diseases, so anti-malarials are very commonly used. Also widely used are treatments such as steroids and immunosuppressants. Now, these can be very useful in the treatment of lupus because they weaken the immune system, which actually reduces the sort of dysfunctional behavior of attacking healthy cells and reduces the lupus symptoms. But it's also a problem because it makes people with lupus more prone to infections such as viruses and bacteria. And obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that's of increased concern. The COVID-19 vaccination program has been massively successful, and we're incredibly grateful for it. It's helped to protect the wider population, and many people with lupus will have had access to the vaccines. Most will have been vaccinated, and it does generally help to reduce the likelihood of experiencing severe illness if they contract COVID-19, which is incredibly important. What we're trying to draw some awareness to is that there are some people with lupus who won't have had full protection from the COVID-19 vaccines. So studies have shown that people on immunosuppressant medications, as many as sort of 40% won't have responded fully to those vaccines. And there are some people who have demonstrated no measurable antibody response at all. So they continue to be as vulnerable potentially as they were in spring last year. And then there's also a small number of people, a much smaller percentage, who have had some form of reaction to the COVID-19 vaccines. We've seen reports that somewhere between sort of 1 to 3% of people with lupus may have had a flare of their disease as a result of the vaccines. And in those cases, they may have been recommended not to have had any subsequent doses, meaning that they've not had the full sort of primary dosage offered.
I've lived with lupus most of my life. I started having issues with what we didn't know were lupus symptoms when I was around 11 or 12 years old. And I had a lot of joint pain and rashes. And actually, I had the very stereotypical lupus rash, malar rash across my face. But my parents knew nothing about lupus, so that didn't really mean anything to them. Luckily, we had a really skilled doctor who diagnosed me with lupus when I was 12. And so I was put on medication and treated as a young person. And then the disease really settled down. And as I went through my life in my early adulthood, I actually was really skeptical and thought that he was wrong and sort of dismissed it. And I went on to eventually have my little girl, my daughter, in my early 30s. And that went okay. But after I had her, I erupted in all sorts of health issues. And actually, I was seeing loads of different specialists. I really didn't know what was going on. And one of them at some point looked at my blood work and said, "Have you seen a rheumatologist?" And I thought, oh, right. And I said, well, no, but I was diagnosed with lupus when I was young. And they said, well, you really need to see your rheumatologist again. And so I went back to them, and I've been since then really heavily managed. And I'm on all the medications that Paul described to try to manage my lupus. And I have almost all of the symptoms that he described. And I mean, lupus is so unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen from day to day. So you wake up in the morning and you can have a different symptom to the one you had yesterday. It's really challenging. But I have, in addition to what he described, I've got a lot of issues with my eyes. So I have really blurry vision and dry eyes, which actually is quite common with lupus. I also have Raynaud's syndrome, so I have really bad circulation too. Everything kind of got worse in the last couple of years because not only have I had to shield because of COVID vulnerability, but I also had the first COVID vaccine back in February of this year. And unfortunately, I had a bad reaction to that. It's often the case that people with lupus look really well. It's something that people talk about a lot on the lupus forums and have to deal with as a lupus community. I mean, obviously that's good in some ways. And I really try to stay positive, and I'm kind of glad that my lupus isn't that visible to people most of the time. But what that means is that you're dealing with a whole lot of issues under the surface. And unless people know you well, they don't necessarily know that. And that can be quite isolating. And sometimes people don't even believe you're sick and don't believe that your symptoms are real. And that can be really upsetting and frustrating too. It's one of the things I'm really grateful to Lupus UK for. The community that we have on Health Unlocked is very supportive. I've relied on it over the years to help me understand side effects from drugs that I'm taking, new symptoms that I'm seeing. It can be comforting to put a symptom out there that you don't even know is related to lupus, and amazing to see all these people come back and say, yeah, me too, me too, me too. And I think because of the nature of the disease, its mysteries, it can be really helpful to have other people who are going through the same thing as you are. I sometimes struggle talking about my reaction to the vaccine because it's really rare, and I know that. Not all people with lupus have had a bad reaction to the vaccine, and I don't want to scare people off of having the vaccine because I really believe in the vaccine. And so that's been challenging because actually it's made me feel more isolated because I don't feel that comfortable talking about it without setting the context, which obviously I can do here. But it's been real for me. And sadly, it might be 1% to 3% of people who have a lupus flare as a result of vaccines. But if you're in that 1% to 3%, it's you. Because of the nature of the resistance to vaccine by certain people and the importance of getting the vaccine out there for everyone, I think there's quite a lot of reticence to talk about the people who can't have it for a range of reasons. And literally, I got a letter yesterday from the immunologist that I've been referred to, who says that they're still trying to figure out medical exemptions. And so there are a number of us discussing online what we do about that. I have family in the US. I really need a medical exemption to the vaccine in case I have to use it. Obviously, I'm not going anywhere. I don't want to use it. But what if I need it? It's quite disturbing that hasn't been really formally sorted out. Those of us in my position, either who are incredibly immunosuppressed and haven't mounted antibodies as a result of the vaccine, or people who just can't have the vaccine, really are relying on government approval of vaccine alternatives. And the ones that are most far along, really, that I know of are monoclonal antibodies, which in my basic layman's terms are antibodies that are infused into you. So you basically get them so that it protects you since you can't create them yourself. And those have been approved as preventatives in the US and in some parts of Europe. And technically here, I understand, but they're not being distributed and they're not in use yet here other than post-COVID infection. And so we're really hoping that something like that becomes available to us as an alternative. The other thing I'd say is that obviously every drug that comes about that helps with post-COVID infection to reduce severe disease and the chance of death is a big benefit to us. So the longer we go and the more those drugs are developed and distributed and made available, the better, because it's hard to shield from this disease forever. And when we get it, we need as much protection as we can get.
The first line of defence is taking precautionary measures to prevent someone from contracting the virus. So shielding is still being advised by some doctors for individuals, even if the main shielding scheme has been stopped now, because it does help reduce the likelihood of contracting COVID. However, that's not a long-term solution, and we know that shielding itself has caused a lot of damage to well-being, both physical and mental. What we need is more alternatives, and there is work being done in this, and some things have actually been approved already. So we know that monoclonal antibody therapies have been approved by the MHRA so that they can be used. We've seen that they've now been approved for use in immunosuppressed people who contract COVID. But what we really want to see is the use of these resources as a prophylaxis, as a preventative treatment for people who don't have protection from the vaccines. And really, it's difficult because it is a scarce resource, it is an expensive resource, but what we want to see is this being available for a relatively small number of people to give them the reassurance that they can continue with life as the rest of society is doing. And other therapies are in development. I know that there's a trial into sort of a non-vaccination nasal spray as well that's going on, but this is still time away, whilst the monoclonal antibody therapy is available now. And so, there are people who are in a less fortunate situation where they're not able to shield, they've got no protection from the vaccines, and they are still at risk. And they're having to continue going into work, they're continuing to have to carry on with life, and they're living with the anxiety and the stress, knowing that if they contract COVID, they may, be very unwell from it. And this treatment is available, so we really want to see pressure placed to make that available as soon as possible. The main thing that we're trying to do at the moment is to raise awareness that there are still people out there who are at an increased risk from COVID-19, despite the widespread and successful rollout of the vaccination programme. It's very difficult for those people to continue to be a part of society and live their lives when they know that they're at risk of contracting the virus. And we've seen a lot of restrictions eased, so it's no longer mandatory to wear face coverings or to keep up social distancing, but these are still recommended, and they're relatively easy and unobtrusive measures to help protect those around us. It's important to remember that they're not measures to protect yourself, but they're to protect other people. And what we want to prevent is a two-tier society where people who remain at risk from COVID-19 are having to continue isolating and don't feel comfortable and confident to be able to go to the shops, take public transport, attend the workplace, collect their medications, or attend medical appointments. These are all incredibly important aspects of life, and we want to make sure that that's maintained. For more information about Lupus UK, COVID, or anything to do with the charity, you can visit our website at www.lupusuk.org.uk. You can also find us on all of the popular social media sites by searching for Lupus UK, or you can call our helpline on 01708 731 251.